All right, so as we continue, chapter 16. Last class we talked a whole bunch about some of the common themes that are taking place at the beginning of this new era. And what's this new era called?
Early modern.
Early modern. Now, does that give you some hint as to what the next era is going to be called?
Modern era.
The modern era. And any guesses what the final era is called? The present era. But postmodern's a good guess too. So we talked about some of the common themes of this era. We talked about gunpowder empires. We talked about global exchange. We talked about new trade products. And we talked about the one group of people that is going to come to dominate this new era, which is Europeans, particularly Western Europeans. And so we finished up with some of the characteristics of Western Europeans that make it a little bit surprising that they became dominant. The fact that they fight with each other all the time. The fact that they really have no discernible, valuable trade goods. The fact that they have a backwards economic system that really doesn't fit the emerging modern economy. The fact that they are not terribly inventive, except when it comes to weaponry. And the fact that as they begin to explore these new lands, they have a very, militaristic view of expansion. Are you guys okay back there?
My hair keeps getting stuck in the chair and it's ripping it out.
You should tuck it down the back of your sweater.
Yeah, that's I have a hair on my No, never. No, I'm keeping it in front.
Okay. Okay, so hair emergency is taken care of. You can all rest easy now. All right, and so where we finished up last class was with this question of why are Europeans expanding? And why are they doing it in this particular way, where they feel the need to conquer rather than cohabitate? Yes, Nick?
If mercantilism didn't work, is that why they developed capitalism?
Yep. Capitalism, communism, socialism, other economic theories that seem to fit the needs of countries better than this one. So where we're going to go today is taking a look at this portion of Europe's development, specifically exploration and colonization. Before we do that, we have one quick public service announcement. For this entire era, we will not be talking about any significant changes to gender roles. Well, you will still absolutely be asked questions about gender roles, but this is the new thing. There's no new thing. Nothing will significantly change. So women in China will still be subject to foot binding. Mongol women on the Asian steppes will still have far more autonomy than their counterparts in more civilized areas. Women throughout much of the world will still have limited political and economic opportunities unless they're in the lower class and are expected to help out with family survival. Societies that were patriarchal will continue to be patriarchal. Women will still occasionally be able to rise to significant power as empresses or queens or advisors, but by and large, women's roles in societies around the world will not change significantly during this period. So this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time today. And this really is best explained through a series of stories. And this is also really, really important to the SOL. So for the purposes of the AP content, some of this really isn't that big a deal. And so we're going to kind of jump back and forth between AP content and SOL content. And to the best of my ability, I will try to tell you which things are more important where. Yes?
So on the AP exams, there's not, it's going to be just multiple choice, how we've been doing it with our tests, or do they have math questions?
They have multiple choice map questions. So they'll put up a map and they'll give you 4 answer stems. They'll put up an image and there'll be 4 answer options, things like that. And we are going to give you some of those as we go forward too, like on your semester exam. It is fun.
Are we going to review for the semester exam?
Not in class. No time. But, again, quick pause on the lecture. But if you look at the vision page, I'll be here every morning at 8 a.m. for like a week and a half for exam review if you want to come in and ask questions about particular parts. And if nobody has questions, I'll be happy to talk about a particular era and basically re-lecture to you. So, yeah.
Can we use class as reviews?
Yep, whatever you want. But again, those things won't necessarily be structured. If people ask for, hey, it's Flex, can we do some kind of review? Sure. But if nobody wants it, I'm not going to waste your time. Interesting question. I don't know yet.
I say yes.
I say no.
Oh, well, Tarina says yes, so fine. Sahil, what was your question?
Is it 1 through 19?
The semester exam? It will be 16, 17. I believe it's going to be 1 through 19. Yeah.
Do you guys make up the grade?
Yeah.
Will the final exam be like all year? Or I know that's far out.
Your final exam will not be a traditional test.
That's okay. You can keep going.
Okay. Okay, so unpause on the lecture. Story time. European explorations involve a lot of people in a lot of places. And so I'm going to try to add a little bit of color to this by trying to put you within, the mindset and, on the ships of these explorers and give you a sense of what they were doing, what they were trying to do, and why it was so intimidating. So to begin with, we're going to start with a man by the name of Bartholomew Diaz. And Bartholomew Diaz is a rather interesting character because he is tasked with the job of getting to India from Portugal. So Bartholomew Diaz, who is Portuguese, is asked by the King of Portugal to find an oceanic route to India.
How do you spell
Portuguese,
Portuguese?
port, P-O-R-T, U, G-E-U-S-E. Or is it U-E? U-E-S-E? Yeah, G-U-E-S-E, right? Yeah, that's right. Portuguese, yeah. That's right. Okay. Now, here's the dilemma, and it's worth pausing here for a moment to talk about why this seems like so much of a harder job than you might think it would be. First of all, this is more or less the known world at the time. This is all that Europeans know of the globe. They know it's round, so let's dispel that first grade myth that they still thought the earth was flat and Columbus is the guy to prove them wrong. No. Ever since the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Mayans, people have known the earth was round. But what they did not know was the extent of the globe. They didn't know how big it was. They didn't know how big this planet was. And so for most Europeans, this is what they knew of more or less. And if you look at ancient maps, you'll see that even these land masses are fairly disfigured because they didn't really know the size and extent of some of these places. Africa looks like this big amorphous blob. Asia is just kind of this round mass of land without any clearly defined coastlines because they didn't know what stuff looked like.
The earth looks like.
Did they think Australia was like part of Africa?
Well, for a time, nobody knew about Australia. They theorized that there might be an undiscovered island continent down here, and there are historical records that refer to a place that people believed existed, and they called this idea Terra Australis Incognito, kind of this undefined, unexplored, undiscovered land. And so they will eventually find and discover the fact that it was there. Their issue with Africa is they don't know how big Africa is. And there were some people that theorized that Africa actually went all the way to the South Pole. Now, they also don't know that Antarctica is there, but they know that the poles are there because they know that their magnets work. So there were some people that thought Africa might actually extend all the way to the South Pole, essentially blocking ocean access to the east. So if that's the case, what are your plausible routes to get from here to here? Trina? All right, good option. Now, if we run through the Mediterranean Sea, the first problem is what? All right, the first problem is the Muslims, who don't necessarily like the Europeans. So that's problem number one. What's problem number two from a sailing standpoint?
There's no Suez Canal.
There's no Suez Canal yet. So at some point you hit land, and you're going to have to get off your boat and walk across the Sinai Peninsula, and then find a new boat, or find a way to carry your boat across the Sinai Peninsula to finish your trip. That's not going to work. So we don't want to go that way. But again, we don't know how long Africa is. So we might end up sailing down the coast of Africa, and come right out here because we can never get around Africa. Which again would be bad. So what are your other options, Nick?
Go north around Russia.
Go north around Russia. Yeah, anybody see Titanic?
Yeah.
That's a bad idea because then you sink. You know, your ship goes under the iceberg and it's sad, and Leonardo DiCaprio dies. And wait, that wasn't sad. Never mind. Okay. So.
You go west.
All right. Well, here's the other option then. Let's say you go west. This is the terrifying part about going west. European navigational tools at the time suck. They have 3 significant navigational tools: the compass, the sextant, and the astrolabe. Now, compass tells you what? It tells you which direction you are going. Now, if you are here, or here, or here, or here, or here, or here, will the compass tell you which direction you're going? Yeah. But will it tell you where you are? No. So like if you have a compass in your car and you're driving down the road, it'll tell you if you're going north or south or southwest or northeast or whatever, but it won't tell you where you are. It won't tell you if you've left Stirling and ended up in Reston. All you'll know is you're going east. So you have to know where you're going in order for the compass to be helpful. Now, the second tool they have is called the astrolabe. Now, the astrolabe is a very cool instrument that is designed to let you measure the location of the sun above the horizon, or the angle between the sun and the horizon. So if the sun is here and the horizon's here, the angle between that can be used to tell you your position north or south of the equator, using a little bit of math. Now, this is better, kind of. It's better because it does actually give you some sense of where you are. But here's the problem. It only tells you where you are in terms of latitude. So you could be here and know that you are 30 degrees or 20 degrees north of the equator. But couldn't you also be here and get exactly the same reading? Or be here and get exactly the same reading? Yeah. So you could have a compass that's telling you, all right, man, we're going west, and we're on the 20-degree latitude line, but we don't know if we're here or here or here or here. Now, they also had a sextant, which also allowed them to have some sense of their position in terms of latitude and direction. But none of these things gave them longitude. None of these tools could tell them where they were east or west of the prime meridian. A way to measure longitude had not been created yet. So if you sail out in the open ocean, do you have a tool to tell you which direction you're going? Yeah, the compass. If you sail out here into the open Atlantic, do you have a tool to tell you the direction that you're sailing? Yeah. Do you have a tool to tell you how far north or south of the equator you are? Yeah. But what do you not know? Right. You still don't know. I mean, you can figure out that you're going this way, but you don't know how far you've come. You don't know how far you are from home. And so without that peace, it's really hard, A, to turn around and come back because there's no landmarks on the ocean. There's no exit signs. There's none of those green road signs that say 20 miles to the New World. You have no sense of direction at this point, and you have no map to tell you where these things are. So, Nick, your idea is sailing west. It's a great idea, but it's also an incredibly terrifying idea because you have no way of knowing where you are. So, north, east, west, or south, which one is the safest option that gives you the best chance of success? South. So the King of Portugal tells Diaz, I want you to find a route to India. And so Bartholomew Diaz sets sail from Portugal and he works his way down the coast of Africa. Why is he sailing along the coast?
Because then he can,
In case he,
it's safer, it's more,
He has something to reference. He has some measure of distance and time. It's a known entity. There are landmarks here. There are essentially signs. There are rock outcroppings. There are jungles. There are forests. There are towns along the coast that give you some sense of where you are. The coast is your friend. Open water is scary.
do tours like stop at like towns and like remote and stuff before they come?
Excellent question. As long as you're someplace that's friendly, yeah, you can stop and get new supplies and ask for directions and things like that. But as you get further and further away from home, and remember, Europeans really haven't ventured out much. Their trip to the Holy Land is pretty much their one big family vacation that they've taken. And by and large, they never leave the house. So sailing down the coast of Africa, brand new experience for them. They don't really have much in the way of contacts there. Also, what do we know about this portion of Africa?
Muslim.
It's Muslim. So again, you may not be getting the best directions there.
They intentionally misdirect you.
It's entirely possible. Plus, think about it. If you're encountering West African people that haven't seen Europeans, you're going to be just as shocked by them as they are of you.
Can you just take trade stuff and then go?
All right, here's the other problem. You know how we've talked about, like, you can go to a foreign country and you can get food because you can point to that and say, rah, 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 rah.
They can't do that.
How do you get directions if you can't communicate? How do you pantomime India? Like me sailing. Wait, is that India? I don't know. Like India, like, you know, how do you communicate at that point? I am trying to go there.
No, I mean just pantomiming it to get stuff and then go on their way, not to get directions.
Now, here's the other problem. Do you have anything to trade?
Guns.
Yeah,
Which
but-
at this point is your one big advantage. And so do you want to give weaponry, lethal weaponry, to people that you've barely met?
That's probably
No. Or they'll kill you with it. So it's a great question, but when you're doing these kinds of explorations, you are typically trying to have the kind of road trip where you don't stop unless absolutely necessary. So you know when you get in the car, maybe it's like a dad or a brother who prides themselves on never stopping for the bathroom. My brother is like this. He considers anybody who can't make it through an entire tank of gas without stopping for the bathroom a weakling. So unless you can hold it for 6 hours, he doesn't want to stop. These kinds of expeditions are much the same way. You're going to load your ship with food and supplies and water to get you as far as is humanly possible without stopping, because you're trying to get someplace. Now, other common misconceptions. Well, why can't you just stop and fish? Because you're moving. Why can't you stop and hunt? Because you're trying to get someplace. And if you stop and if you hunt and if you hunt and you hunt and you hunt, you don't catch anything. You've wasted time, energy, supplies, and you still have no food. So again, on these voyages, the idea is get as much stuff on the boat as possible and then don't stop. So, Bartholomew Diaz. Sailing down the coast, now pretty much in uncharted territory. No idea where he is.
Are there people down there?
Yes.
Can't do that.
Communication barrier. Really hard to figure out from the locals where you are and where you're going. Now, this is where his story...
Steal stuff from the locals?
Well, yeah, if you want to piss them off. Now, imagine the box is still there. He keeps sailing down the coast, sailing down the coast. His men, by this point, have kind of given up hope that they're ever going to find a route to India. And they're now grumbling amongst themselves, we need to go home. We need to turn back. This voyage is a failure. Let's just cut our losses. We're running out of food. We're running out of water. Imagine the irony of that. You're surrounded by water on all sides, and you are running out of drinkable water.
They couldn't desalinate it.
No. And so then to make matters worse, they get about to this point, still not knowing where they are, and a storm comes up. And it's a bad storm. And have anybody ever actually been to South Africa? Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of sharks, A. But this particular point where these two oceans converge has horrible, horrible currents. The winds are tricky. They blow from different directions sporadically. The waves are real rough. It's very hard to control a ship powered by wind in those waters. Well, here's why. A storm comes up in these already tricky waters. And Diaz has basically two options at this point. Stay within sight of land and risk running his ship aground and it sinking on the rocks, or head out into open water, escape the storm, and then pray to God he can find his way back. They decide to do this because they have no hope of surviving the storm that close to shore. And so for 3 days they sail further south, losing sight of all land. Now, what could happen to them? They could get caught in some ocean current that could take them way out here, and they would not know where they are. They could get caught in some ocean current that could take them this way, even though they don't know there is a that way yet. Or they could get stalled right there. Bottom line, do they have technology to tell them where they are? No. And so they would have no way of knowing. And so if they then looked to their compass and said, all right, well, let's head north, they could head north and be sailing forever and have no idea where they are. And so this is the truly scary portion of Diaz's voyage. Now, miraculously, they are able to sail back to land. And they come within sight of that point of South Africa again, and they name it the point, or the Cape of Good Hope, which is what it's still referred to as today, the Cape of Good Hope.
What?
Good hope. Because it gave them hope, because they had in fact found a way past Africa into the Indian Ocean. Now, at this point, with their supplies virtually exhausted, Diaz agrees to turn his ship around, and then learns, much to his dismay, that there are things called prevailing winds and ocean currents that are like one-way streets. And so the currents and winds that brought him safely along the coast of Africa are now working against him as he tries to return. And so he once again has to put his faith in his navigational skills and his God and sail out into open water until he's able to once again sight the coast of Africa and make it safely back home to Portugal. So he gets back to Portugal, finding a way around Africa. How do you think he feels like he's going to be received? Well, he's just done something amazing. He has found hope, both literally, the Cape of Good Hope, and hope that there is in fact a way to India. Guess what happens? He gets fired.
Because he didn't make it all the way?
Because he didn't get to India.
Even though there's a way around Africa?
Right, because the king was interested in results. Diaz didn't get results. But they did establish that a route this way was possible. And so the Portuguese will now begin to set up trading forts along the coast, mingling with the locals, spreading Christianity, and making sure that they have places along the way to supply their ships. Now, this becomes problematic for Spain, Portugal's neighbor, because Spain, just like every other European country, wants to get over here. They want to get to India. They want to get to China. They want to get to the East Indies. And so an Italian goes to the King of Portugal and says, hey, I have an idea. What if we sail west? We know there's a route here, but I've done some calculations, and I think if we sail west, knowing the earth is round, we can come over here and have a much shorter voyage. And the King of Portugal says to this Italian, Christopher Columbus, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. And so Columbus goes to the King of Spain and pitches the same idea. And the King of Spain looks at the map and says, well, I can't go this way anymore because the Portuguese now control it. Icebergs, Muslims, west is the only option I have. And so Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain agree to finance Columbus's voyage. So, Hill, what was your question?
Where you have the yellow box,
Uh-huh.
basically how they thought how wide the earth was.
Yep.
Wait, did you go over Vasco De Gama?
We're going to come back to him. Yeah. Do what? Yeah, we're going in order that they happen. So Bartholomew Diaz is like 1487. Christopher Columbus has his mystical, magical, famous voyage in what year? 1492.
1477.
Yeah, Diaz is 1487. And again, it's not so much important that you know the dates as it is that you have a sense of chronology. Now again, imagine the box is still there. So, you put the box back. All right, so Columbus sails down the coast of Africa, and he reaches the Canary Islands, which are by this point well established. And this is kind of his last refueling stop. And then he turns and he sails west into the open ocean, heading west-southwest, I guess you would call it. And he's on the water for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Okay, well, that doesn't sound that long. But again, when you have to have all of your supplies for all of your men for all of that time, you know, we're talking about 85 men.
With their technology and how much they knew about everything, it should
Well, I mean, we can now make this trip in a matter of a few days. So for it to take them a month is actually pretty lengthy. Well, I'm not talking about aircraft. I'm talking about on the water. So I understand you might have been expecting this to be like a 6-month voyage. No, it's not that far. I mean, you could canoe that in 6 months. I mean, you get tired, but you know.
So does that mean you just renewed the whole night without factoring in actual energy?
So again, Columbus's crew has the same issues. They're tired, they're hungry, they're running low on water, and they've given up hope. Because being out on the water for that long is very psychologically trying. The scenery doesn't change. I mean, maybe some days it's wavier, some days there's a better sunset, some days there's birds, some days there's dolphins. But I mean, you're surrounded by water all the time. From the time you get up to the time you go to bed. It's the same sounds. It's a fairly silent experience. It drives you a little bit crazy. And so Columbus's men, just like Diaz, are beginning to complain and beginning to think about mutiny, overthrowing their captain, pitching him over the side, and going back home. And so once again, when all seems lost, they hit land. And so Columbus steps off the ship, falls to his knees in the sand on the beach, and thanks God for delivering them from the ocean and helping them find land. Where does he think he is? He does not think he's in India. He recognizes the fact that he's on an island, and India is most definitely not an island.
He thinks he's in the South Pacific.
Right. He thinks he's someplace over here in what we call the East Indies. And so when he meets the natives, the Taino people, he refers to them as Indians because he believes he's in the East Indies. And that these are, in fact, Indian people from the Indies. Stephen?
What are the lands?
It depends. Some people say the Bahamas. Some people say the Dominican Republic. Right. Typically, you hear the Bahamas or the Dominican. In any case, Columbus has landed. He has found land which he firmly believes to be these islands. And so taking, a couple of the locals captive, because who cares, and taking some of the local crops and natural foods and things, they pile back in their ship, again, have to find a different current, different trade winds, and make an equally scary voyage back home because, again, they don't know where they are. And so, it's a really good question, and I honestly don't know. Probably a week or two. Make repairs to their ship, hunt, find new supplies, enslave natives, things like that take time. Nick?
Why didn't any of these explorers just go there and stay there and live out their lives?
Well, on his second voyage, Columbus actually makes 4 voyages. On his second, he went with the intent of establishing colonies. The colonies were not terribly successful.
Didn't the natives realize what the Spanish were doing?
Not right away, because again, the native perception of these people was that they were strangers, but they didn't know anything about them, and so they wrongly assumed that they could cohabitate and work together, and the conflicts will come later.
Much more warlike people.
Right. Now, in any case, we are now going to have a source of conflict. Spain and Portugal are now fighting over this territory because Portugal has continued its explorations and they feel like they have the right to these. They found the way to get there first. These belong to them. Columbus thinks, man, I landed there. They belong to the country I was working for. And so Spain and Portugal are now fighting over these disputed islands, and each one feels like they have the rightful claim. And as 2 Catholic, God-fearing countries, they feel like the only person that can resolve their dispute is the Pope. And so they go to the Pope, and the Pope is looking at them like a parent will look at 2 kids fighting in the back seat of the car on a road trip. After hours and hours of he's touching me and she took my stuff and he took my toy and I don't like her and she's smelly and they're poking each other and all that, you finally get to the point of, all right, stop it. We're drawing a line in the middle of the back seat. You stay on your side. You stay on your side. If you don't, I will pull this car over. That's about where the Pope is. He's had enough. And in typical parent fashion, he takes out his magic Pope pen and he draws a line. And he says, you stay on this side. You stay on this side. Fight over. So he literally takes the globe in his office of the known world at the time, which again excludes all of this because nobody knows about it in Western Europe, and he draws a line. And he says, all right, whoops, that's an eraser. He draws a line. And he says, all right, Portugal, you explored first. You made it around Africa first. You have the rightful claim to this area. So everything to the east of this line of demarcation, all undiscovered lands, belong to Portugal. So let's clarify this for a moment. Undiscovered lands. So Portugal does not suddenly rule all of Europe and Asia. They rule the undiscovered lands. So coastal Africa, that nobody has laid claim to yet. India, the East Indies, all of that will belong to Portugal if and when they discover it, as long as it stays on their side of the line. Now, if you're Spain, how are you feeling right now?
Very bad.
Yeah, you just got screwed. Because again, nobody knows about this. So as far as you're concerned, if we go back to our backseat analogy, this would be like when the 2 kids fight and the parent turns around and draws the line. But when they draw the line, they tell the older sibling, all right, you get the whole back seat. And they turn to the little one and they say, you get to ride in the trunk. Spain gets nothing. Spain gets nothing. If you're Spain at this point, what are you holding out hope for?
Something.
You're holding out hope that maybe there's a few islands out here that have something of value, because that's really your only option. Because everybody knows how big the world is right now. And everybody knows there ain't nothing else other than this. Yep, and the Pope gave it all to Portugal because they were there first. There's only one Pope.
At a time.
Well, there are a few instances where we've had 2 or even 3 simultaneously, but yeah, before the Protestant Reformation.
The French Pope and the Latin.
Yep. Question.
So, if the Philippines are in the area given to Portugal, then why did Spain get them?
We'll get there.
So no other countries were discovering that area?
Nope, no other countries were in the process of exploration at that point. So just Spain and Portugal, because they were the closest to all the rest of this. So if you're France or Germany or Italy, I mean, you're so much further east that this just doesn't seem like a good use of your resources.
England.
And England's just running behind at this point. Nick?
Doesn't Spain just take over Portugal and say, you don't have a government
Nope. They can't. Nice try.
bigger than Portugal?
Okay, so at this point, we're now going to come back to Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama is going to attempt to strengthen Portugal's control over this eastern half of the world. Vasco da Gama. So Vasco da Gama is going to follow the route that Diaz established around the Cape of Good Hope, and he will sail into the Indian Ocean, again with the intent of trying to get to India. Now, once he's past the southern tip of Africa, he again is someplace that no European explorers have ever been. This is 1497, by the way.
When was the Treaty of
I want to say it's 1495, 1496, but I could be wrong. It may have been dragged out. So, Da Gama has no choice but to work his way up the coast of Africa, stopping at local villages along the way for supplies, maybe try to get directions. Again, they're Muslim speaking, or they're speaking a variation on, not Muslim speaking, that was stupid, Arabic speaking, or at least a new variation of Arabic called Swahili, which is a combination of Arabic and Bantu. And so because Europeans have had exposure to Arabic already through the Crusades, there are people in Europe that speak some Arabic. And so through some loose translations, Da Gama does have one man that is able to kind of get directions from the locals. But the problem is the locals don't always like him. Da Gama was not a nice man. He was very, very rough around the edges, kind of spontaneous, not really patient. And as he's on this voyage, he wants to get to India, and he wants to get there as quickly as possible, and he doesn't really want to be nice with all these new people he's encountering, because he really just looks down on them as being inconsequential. The prize is India, not the east coast of Africa. And so there are definitely times where his temper gets the better of him in these African villages, and he pulls out his guns and he just takes stuff, and he shoots some of the locals and things like that. So he's not leaving a very favorable impression of the Portuguese as he works his way up the African coast. But he doesn't really care about that, because he does finally make the jump to India. Nick?
Did he ever get to the Christians in Ethiopia?
Mm-mm. Nope, that'd be too far up. Now, when he lands in Calcutta on the west coast of India, and he anchors his boat off the beach, and he takes the little rowboat, and he hits the sand, and he takes that first step on Indian soil. I mean, you got to imagine this felt like a Neil Armstrong kind of moment. Like, you know, small step for man, giant leap for mankind kind of situation. Well, right, and they knew there were people there because that's why they were trying to get to India, was to get to the Indian people that had all the cool Indian stuff and trade for it. And as he's setting foot on Indian soil, I mean, you got to imagine he's probably just so proud of himself and so impressed and so thankful that this voyage was a success. And I'm sure he was probably expecting the people around him to be as appreciative of this moment as he was. People in India probably cared less. Probably didn't care much at all that there was a funny-looking white man getting out of a boat who probably hadn't bathed or shaved in months and was now making very, very loud demands in the markets as he was trying to trade his crappy iron pots and pans and beaded necklaces and cooking knives and things like that for Indian spices and cotton and silks and porcelain from China, and getting more and more outraged that nobody would trade with him because nobody wanted his stuff because it sucked. And so he finally demands an audience with the governor in Calcutta, and they grant it to him. I'm not sure why. And he starts making demands of this man, who's one of the, Calcutta is one of the richest cities in India at this point, and so the guy ruling this city is one of the most important people of what at this time is known as the Mughal Empire. This guy is a prince among princes. And here's De Gama, a raggedy sailor, a European ship captain, not even a noble, making demands of this royal governor. And he's like, you need to let us establish a trading post here. You need to cede some of your territory to us so that we can create, a fort that belongs to Portugal and is run by Portuguese people. And you need to allow us to trade in your markets. And you need to make your people actually trade with us because they're being very mean to us. And you got to imagine this Mughal governor's looking at him like, you must be out of your mind, white man. Why on earth would we give you anything? You have nothing of value to us. And De Gama's got to be looking at this like, God, I got here. I made it to India and I can't accomplish anything. This is so frustrating. And so much as he had along the coast of Africa, he resorts to pulling out his guns. He storms out of the governor's palace and he heads back through the market and he shoots a few people and he steals some stuff and he jumps in his boat slightly ahead of a very angry mob and parks his ship off the coast and engages in piracy for a few weeks, sinking trading vessels as they come in and taking their stuff before he sinks them. He's actually so outraged at one point that he hijacks what he believes to be a merchant ship and boards it, and it's full of like 400 people, no significant trade goods other than food. And he's demanding of these people, where are the valuable things? Where are the spices? Where's the gold? Where anything valuable? I'm going to take it or I'm going to kill you. And they're like, well, we're pilgrims. We're Muslim pilgrims heading to Mecca for the Hajj.
Aren't they a little bit off course?
Well, no, because they're leaving India to go to Mecca, because Islam is the second most popular religion in India. And De Gama, in his outrage and frustration, sinks the ship with all 400 and some odd people on it.
Ouch.
So again, he's not necessarily leaving the best impression of Portuguese people. And so at long last, having stolen what he could and bought what he could with the little bit of gold and silver he was allowed to take, he makes the return voyage back home. How do you think he's received?
Great. He came back from India.
He gets a hero's welcome. He gets a title. He gets a statue. Because he brought back what the king wanted. Granted, not much of it, but he brought back the spices and the silk and the cotton and everything else. Obviously in small quantities, but he found that A, it's possible, and B, that the stuff is there. And now we just need to get over this minor hurdle of how do we trade for it. But he even solved that problem because, well, we just use force, which again is going to cement in Europeans' minds the fact that force is the answer here. Simply take what you want because we can't trade for it. Now, if you're Spain you are blown. Because Portugal now has an iron grip on this Indian Ocean trade. And so if you're Spain, you are putting all of your faith in Columbus's theory that there is actually a western route. Except after all 4 of Columbus's voyages, which heads into the early 1500s, he has yet to find a successful western route to the Orient, to China or India or the East Indies. He keeps running into these lands that are obviously not the East Indies. But again, based on what people know at the time, they assume that, well, these are probably just some random islands or archipelagos someplace out here in the middle of the Pacific, and we're almost there. And really, we just need to find a way to get around this massive islands in the way. So, Spain commissions a new ship captain named Ferdinand Magellan. And Ferdinand Magellan is going to modify Columbus's plan slightly. And he's going to sail much further south than Columbus ever did. Again, with the hope of getting past all of these island obstacles that Columbus kept bumping into. Because Columbus worked his way all over the Caribbean, and he kept running into land that was not Asia. And so Magellan says, well, I'm just going to bypass all of this. He's like, it must be like road construction, you know. And so I'm going to sail so much further south than Columbus ever did, I'll probably just slip right by it. And so he lands on the coast of South America.
Ferdinand from Spain,
Yes.
and he's going, where was he going to?
I'm still trying to get to all the same places.
What time is this?
This is 15. I want to say it's like the 15 teens, maybe like 1513, 1514, something like that. I could be off by 10 years. It could be like 1520s, but more or less that point. So Magellan sails far, far south compared to Columbus, hoping to just bypass whatever this mess is here. And again, he's assuming that maybe there's a little bit of land here, but this and this is all open water. And so I'll just be able to sail right past it, get to Asia.
And the back
Well, and again, believing that, you know, this is actually the end, and so we're really just going to wrap right through there.
And if you look at it, it makes more sense to wrap the Americas on the other side.
Well, and again, nobody knows about this
Yeah,
yet,
but
so
you look at the world map again, America, you look at the where Americans trading, America should be on the right. Could think of that, right?
okay, yeah. So Magellan hits land and again assumes, well, crap, I just hit one of these other large islands like Columbus found, so I'm just going to keep sailing south. There's no reason to go north because Columbus explored this area and there's no way through. So he sails south. And he sails south. And he sails south. And it's getting cold. There are penguins down here. It's that cold. There are penguins in the southern tip of South America.
In Argentina.
Does he stop and talk to the people?
Well, he doesn't find much in the way of people along these coasts. I mean, you do not have significant coastal settlements at this point. He does have to stop a few times to make repairs to his ship, chop down trees to get extra lumber, things like that. And he has to make a very important stop right about here. Paul?
Did you ever figure out that ship from the country instead of island?
We're getting to that, yeah. Although you got to imagine that after having sailed all this way, he's thinking, wow, this is big.
This isn't just an island.
So Spain's only allowed the west part, but he's still trying to get to the east. And that's what they're going to settle.
Because again, they're hoping, you know, if the line of demarcation from the Treaty of Tordesillas is here, they're still hoping to find things of value here. Or if nothing else, they're hoping to find a route through all of Portuguese territory to establish Chinese cities. So like Portugal doesn't suddenly get to control China. Like China's too powerful for that. And so if the Spanish can even just get into Beijing or Nanjing or places like that, then they could at least trade directly with the Chinese. Now, Magellan has to stop at this point because, once again, repetitive story, his crew is about to mutiny. It's turning out to be a longer voyage than they expect. They're tired, they're frustrated, they're scared, they're hungry, etc., etc., etc. Magellan has 5 ships on this voyage, 235 men, something like that. We'll get there. And so one of his, lieutenants basically threatens to strand Magellan, kick him off the boat, put him on the land, and turn all the ships around and go home. And so Magellan ends up having to make a very public example of him and basically buries him alive and then says, all right, anybody else want to go? And 3 of his ships turn around and go home. And the other 2 stay. And so it's at this point that Magellan says, all right, well, we're going to keep going because that's what we were sent here to do. And he finds a way through South America without having to go all the way around. To this day, that place is known as the Strait of Magellan. Let me borrow this for a second. And so if you have your textbook in front of you, it gives you a slightly clearer picture of South America. But you can see that the very, very southern tip of South America is actually an island. It's called Tierra del Fuego, land of fire. There are active volcanoes down there. And there is a small, narrow passage between what is actually the southern tip of South America and that island. And so the passage of water between those is discovered by Magellan, and he names it after himself. And so even today, it's still known as the Strait of Magellan. Well, I mean, this is pretty common for explorers that are going to some place that nobody else has ever found. They want their name to live on. You see the same thing with scientists discovering new, atoms or animals or whatever. They typically find a way to insert their name into its new name. Stephen? Somebody later. I don't know. My knowledge runs out every once in a while. I'm sorry. David?
No one's ever really cared that after himself other than in the negative way.
Well, but then you look at who's going to come to dominate this land, and it's the Spanish. So why wouldn't they preserve his name?
Yeah.
So at this point, Magellan is the first European to enter the Pacific Ocean, and he gives it that name as well. Pacific meaning passive, as in calm. Because after the turbulence of the Atlantic Ocean, which is fairly choppy, the Pacific to him seemed like a dream. It was flat, it was calm, it was smooth, it was beautiful. And so once again, you do the safe thing, you work your way up the coast. And Paul, getting back to your question, it's about at this point that Magellan, who is keeping meticulous maps of this voyage, as any good ship captain is going to do, discovers the extent of this new land, realizing this ain't an island. Or if it is, it's a really, really big island. And at this point, the significance of the Treaty of Tordesillas hits home.
That whole thing belongs to Spain.
Because that whole thing belongs to Spain. Now, it's also interesting to note that as maps become clearer later on, it doesn't all belong to Spain, does it? There's a wee little bit of Brazil that's actually on the Portuguese side.
Is that why the Portuguese is the language in Brazil?
And that's why Portuguese is the dominant language in Brazil rather than Spanish. No. Well, right, because they do quickly then expand beyond the part of the line that's theirs, reasoning, and rightfully so. Spain has all of this to worry about. Well, and again, what we're going to find is that very quickly this treaty gets discarded. And it quickly becomes an issue of you get whatever you can hang on to. But back to Magellan. Magellan still hasn't completed his trip. And so reaching this point and discovering, wow, okay, huge landmass, great, wonderful, fine, I'm going to be a hero, assuming I get home, he still has to get home. And at this point, still believing the earth can't possibly be any bigger, he reasons, well, Asia must just be like right there. It's got to be. The earth can't possibly be much bigger than this. And so basically, taking their life in their own hands, they turn the ship west, and they sail for a lot longer across the Pacific than they had ever planned.
They managed that? Wow.
Now, they are reduced to exhausting all of their food supplies. They then kill all the rats on the ship and eat the rats. And then a very creative carpenter on board the ship suggests that they take some of the files, like metal file that you use to smooth wood, and file down portions of the ship to create mounds of sawdust, and then mix the sawdust with a little bit of water and eat it like oatmeal. It's tasty. Yeah, they didn't have that much time. Well, because cannibalism is not only impolite, but it's also kind of a sin. And these are good God-fearing Catholics, after all. So,
How do people know that they ate sawdust?
because some of the crew survives to tell the story.
They don't just die and sink somewhere.
So, they do eventually land in some of the Pacific islands. Guam and the Philippines. Half dead. Many of them are all the way dead. Out of the 235, well, some. Out of the 235 that left Spain, there's only about 50.
How many of those 235 returned to Spain?
I'm getting there. Quit trying to end my story prematurely. You're one of those people that flips to the back of the book before the book's over, aren't you?
I read the page on the back.
Uh-huh. Cheater.
No, I
Cheater.
read the back
So the
of
ship lands, and these guys are out of food. They're barely functioning. I mean, their bodies are wasting away. And so when they land, they're not really capable of taking care of themselves. And they're fortunate enough to land on an island that has somewhat friendly natives. And the natives take pity on these mostly dead humans and nurse them back to health. Food and water and medicine and witch doctor chanting and the whole deal.
And then they killed
Now, out of thanks, Magellan and his surviving crew, try to give them some of the trinkets and whatnot that they brought to trade, and the natives really aren't that impressed. You're noticing a trend here. And so Magellan and his crew then try to offer the only other reasonable gift they can consider, and for them it's a gift that's far more valuable than those trinkets. Eternal salvation through the worship of Christ. And so they erect a cross on the beach of the island, and they lead a worship service, and they demonstrate to the natives how you should properly pray and things like this. And they were probably a little bit more forceful than they realized, just out of their gratitude and thanks. And the natives did not take kindly to this imposed religion. And a fight starts. And the fight quickly spews into a civil war between the sides of the islanders that are like, hey, we could try this, and the islanders that are like, no, we're just going to kill these white devils. And long story short, Magellan and many of his crew are shot with poison arrows and or impaled with spears. And the survivors quickly decide that discretion is the better part of valor, and we should just run back to the ship and leave. So,
Did Magellan himself survive?
no, Magellan dies in the Philippines.
Second ship of that group,
It sank. So one ship in the water. One ship makes it back to Spain with 18 surviving sailors. The ship becomes the first European vessel to circumnavigate the globe, to navigate the circumference of the earth. Now, this is typically attributed to Magellan, and so from an SOL standpoint, they will often say that Magellan is the first to circumnavigate the globe.
But he died halfway.
But he died in the Philippines, so I dispute that claim. But his ship made it, and so, the captain lives on with the ship as well as goes down with it. So Magellan gets credit for that. The bigger deal in all of this, circumnavigation aside, is that because of Magellan's voyage, Spain discovers that there is in fact not only a giant Earth out there, but that they just won the proverbial lottery and discovered most of what will eventually become 2 continents that are all theirs based on the Treaty of Tordesillas. Well, until lots of Europeans start to steal them. All right, so your map has a few other explorers of note. So, very quickly, Jacques Cartier is a Frenchman, you might have guessed it by the name, who is still searching for what comes to be known as the Northwest Passage. Now, Spain has already clearly established there ain't no easy passage to Asia going this way.
But they didn't come across.
And so the hope, well, you still can't get through here.
There's no Panama Canal, there's no Suez Canal.
Right. So Cartier decides I'm going to stay as far north as possible and see if I can't find a route. Actually, I drew that wrong. Hang on.
Newfoundland?
And so he lands in Canada. And he works his way down the St. Lawrence Seaway for a ways, hoping that this would lead him through whatever land this might be. And it doesn't. And so he turns around and he heads home. But this is going to establish the exploration of North America. And many, many, many more explorers will attempt to find what they believe to be a Northwest Passage, a shortcut through all of this to get to Asia. It's a long time before people get really excited about the land itself, because really all they want is a way to get here. They have tunnel vision. Yeah, whatever. It's in the way. We want to get to Asia. Yeah, okay, great, new land, whatever. It's in the way. We want to get to Asia. There really isn't much of an appreciation at first for the new land itself until they exhaust all the possibilities of finding a direct route to Asia. And then it's almost like, well, I guess we'll settle for all this new land. And then as they discover just how rich it is in natural resources, especially gold and silver, and how perfect the climate is to grow cash crops like sugar and tobacco and cotton, they realize what a proverbial gold mine they've struck, and that this will now solve all of their economic issues in terms of trade with Asia. Paul?
Is Jacques the reason why Canada is French?
Yep. And he attempts to establish Quebec, and his initial settlement fails, but they reestablish it later and still call it Quebec. And Canada gets its name from the native tribes there. Katana was their name for village, and so they were trying to point Cartier towards the next village down the St. Lawrence Seaway, and he fancies the name, and so he calls it Canada, and then it's Canada, and so, yeah.
Okay. So the T and they got the
Language is lazy, yeah.
They got switched a bit and
Wasn't
softened.
Francis Drake the person who just Queen had to be a pirate?
Privateer.
Yeah.
So, Hill, what's your question? Oh, you're good? Okay. All right. So Sir Francis Drake, quick story about him because he's awesome. He's one of my favorites. Sir Francis Drake is an English privateer, which means that he is endorsed by his monarch, Queen Elizabeth, with a letter of marque, which gives him the right to sink vessels belonging to other countries, specifically countries that England is at war with, like Spain. And so Drake is sent to the Caribbean, and he sails all over the Caribbean, sinking Spanish ships and stealing their gold and silver.
Wait, where is he from?
England. And he goes back home with millions of dollars in gold and silver, and he goes back to the Caribbean and he sinks more ships, and he gets millions of dollars in gold and silver from the Spanish and goes back to England, and the Spanish are absolutely furious with him. They put a $10 million reward on his head for his capture or his death. Now, eventually Drake gets bolder and bolder, and he not only attacks Spanish ships, but he attacks Spanish settlements. And he does a guerrilla warfare style of raid on a settlement in Panama that's like straight out of the Black Ops video game. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like nighttime jungle invasion. It's just crazy. And he pulls it all off. And his ships are so loaded down with gold and silver that they're bursting at the seams.
Did any of them come out on them?
Sometimes. And so eventually, the Spanish go in pursuit of Drake. And he realizes that he can't escape them by sailing back across the Atlantic because that's what they expect him to do. So he does the unexpected. He starts to sail down the coast of South America, raiding Spanish settlements along the coast as he goes. And this is like in the 1570s, I think. And so he sails down the coast, and he sails down the coast, and the Spanish are still chasing him because they're pissed. And so then Drake, again, attempts to do the unexpected. Rather than go through the Strait of Magellan, which is the commonly used passage, he goes all the way around Tierra del Fuego, establishing what today